We are here with Jock Bartley from Firefall. They are going to be here in Tucson on October 29th. You can get your tickets at the Rialto Theater's box office or online right here at klpx.com. Jock, thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit.
Hi there, how's it going in Tucson?
It's finally starting to, I think we're starting to get some of your weather down here, so it should be nice and chilly when you get here.
It's just now getting chilly in Colorado, and it's been a beautiful Indian summer for about a month, and loving it.
So what can people expect who haven't seen you guys in quite a while here in Tucson when you perform on the 29th?
Well, I have to say that we've got the best vocals we've got with Steve Weinmeister and John Bisaha, our bass player John Bisaha and Steve, the other guitar player, that we've had since pretty much the old days live. And of course, the best two lead vocalists in Firefall were the guys who wrote all the big songs, Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, but they haven't been in the band for, 25 years or something, So we have great vocals, the instrumentalist, myself on lead guitar, and Jim Waddell on sax and flute. We're just a rocking unit right now, and I am really, really pleased with how our live shows are this last 3, 4 years.
So I know that recently you put out a couple albums in the last few years, Friends and Family and Friends and Family 2, where you kind of revisit some of the other 70s artist songs. What got that whole
There's
project?
friends and family. Uh-oh, it's got the um about 3 years ago, my manager slash record label called and said, Jock, the original members of Firefall played in a lot of other famous bands, like the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers and Spirit and JoJo Gunn with Mark Andes. I played with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris. And he said, why don't you guys do an album of just their material?
Oh,
And
wow.
I went, wow, what a great idea. Because, of course, we've got, I don't know, 8 or 10 albums out of all our material and greatest hits and all that. It's always been our material. And I said to him, that's a great idea, but, I want to expand that because in 1976, Firefall got to tour and got to be friends with the Doobie Brothers, Fleetwood Mac, Leonard Skinner, Marshall Tucker, Loggins and Messina. Let's do a song of theirs too from that era. And he said, great. So then it came down to, okay, now which song are we talking about? Because when you look at the Doobie Brothers, you really got 18 or 20 songs to choose from,
Yeah.
you know. And my singer, John Bisaha, our bass player for the last 4 years after Mark Andes retired, he said, I could really sing Long Train Running. And I went, bingo, And the same thing, it's like, which Dan Fogelberg song should we do? And Steven said, hey, I really would love to do, Younger, and as a lead guitar player, it was really great for me because like on those Dan Fogelberg songs,
Hmm.
you know, that's the solo. So I learned dance solo, and it wasn't exactly the same. And it was, of course, a different player and a different guitar, and 30 years later or something, but I played his solo because that's what it's supposed to be, honoring that song of the era, you know. But then for instance, on the Leonard Skinner songs, it's like those were the three hottest lead guitar players going for a while.
Hmm.
And so I just, put them in my heart and my gut, and went out there and as a lead guitar player just played it, and played it hot and had them in my heart too. And it was really a pleasure playing what ended up becoming 2 albums of the best other bands and their songs, 20, how many we got? 13 on one and 12 on the other. So that's 25 songs honoring the 70s. And Firefall played a small role in the 70s and got to tour with a lot of these bands. And it was just great fun. Now, I have to say that I'm in the studio now, and we're making a new Firefall album of Firefall songs, and are redoing a couple of our big hits like Just Remember I Love You or Strange Way in a more acoustic vein.
Oh, wow.
We got a new album coming out, and I just know how lucky I am and how fortunate I am as a mid 70s guys to still be making records. I mean, who would have thunk it?
So, what's interesting too, especially with a lot of the 70s bands and some of the early 80s bands, that this thing now that people are calling yacht rock has brought your music to a younger generation. Have
Right.
you seen an increase in looking out in the crowd and seeing younger faces than as well as some of the faces that have been out there since the beginning?
Well, that's a very intuitive question, sir. Um, the truth is, and I've talked about it on numerous other interviews in the last couple of months, is that I look out over the crowd, and our crowd is 60s and 70s and some 50s thrown in and some 40s thrown in. But almost every night there's a couple of 20-year-olds singing along with all the songs, or 30-year-olds, and you're going, and the answer to that is that they grew up, within the 70s music with their parents playing Dan Fogelberg and the Eagles and Firefall. And it does blow my mind, and particularly when we're doing the merch table after the show, and some 25-year-old kids will come up and say, man, I love you guys music. And you're going, well, and the truth is that it's really about the songs,
Yeah.
and we have a certain sound of Firefall in our first couple albums, didn't sound like anybody else in the mid to late 70s, and it's all about the songs, but it's all from that, earlier 60s, I mean, the Beatles, the Stones, Buffalo Springfield, the Byrds,
Mhm.
and for me to have played in a band with four members or three members of the Byrds, has, was unthinkable when I was in high school, just listening to that first album of the Byrds. It was like, wow. So I was at the right place a couple of times and know how fortunate I am. And it's still great doing it, I'll tell you.
Yeah, how often do you tour? I mean, it looks like this Tucson
Weekend, Weekend Warriors.
a Weekend Warriors. So you go out for a few days and then back home?
Yeah. And in fact, our agent and our manager are booking next year now. And they said, yeah, we can do this great tour with, and I won't name the other three or four bands, but a lot of the same people that we've been touring with a lot, which is great. Um, and they were saying, yeah, it's 8 gigs in 10 days. And I went, wait a minute, you know, we don't really do 10 days anymore. Okay. It's like, break that up, or else maybe Firefall won't be doing a couple of those at the end or something, because, what's great is the gigs,
Hmm.
and even the sound checks are fun because we get to screw around sometimes. But, you know, it's the gigs that are great. And now the traveling and the hotels and you didn't get to rent a car, it's like, where's the limo? They're supposed to pick us up. It's just a hassle touring, but it's worth it because of the gigs. But we're kind of, us and Orleans and Atlanta Rhythm Section and some of those other bands are kind of limiting now. We only want to go out for 3 or 4 gigs and then come home for a while.
No, that makes sense. That's because, when you're gone months and months at a time, you kind of miss out on your real life.
Yeah, and when Firefall hit in 1976 and our album went gold for Atlantic Records, and this blows my mind, but their rep told us that our album in 76 went gold quicker than any other album on Atlantic Records ever. And we went, wait a minute. You got the Stones, you got Aretha, you got, the Rascals, you've got, all these, Led Zeppelin, they said, nope, and it went gold in about 2.5 months. And suddenly we're touring with Fleetwood Mac and the Doobie Brothers. And, it was just a whirlwind. And yeah, I was gone. Yeah, my marriage broke up. in my apartment, I couldn't have a dog or a cat for sure. And we were gone for, probably 3 out of 4 months with very little time off. Oh, well, you got next Monday and Tuesday off. Geez, okay, thanks.
And then probably too back then the labels wanted the next record too.
They did.
Yeah. So it was constant.
And
So
then, go ahead.
you were just talking about we were just talking about friends and family too, and the touring and the meeting all these other bands that you became friends with. Have you had any feedback about your covers of their songs from any of the other bands?
I don't really think so, but um, let me look here because no, I haven't personally, but and I knew making these records that we weren't going to get on any radio stations. And surprisingly, there are stations around that have played some of these. And it's back to back with the original artist. And then they'll throw a song of the new Firefall album, with a cover of whatever Beach Boy song or Bird song. But it's funny. It's really great to be able to have new records, even though I would bet you that, unfortunately, that Firefall and a lot of those other bands like us, that and Pure Prairie League and all those bands wouldn't ever have a new hit, because there's a whole slew of radio stations that will play our old hits, and they'll play sometimes for an hour, or the Firefall hour or whatever.
Hmm.
But in terms of new radio, nah, the radio's too weird, and it's like too much money, and you have to be in with the right people or the right PR or whatever kind of people. And the days, Larry, of jocks like yourself who are in a station and kind of can play what you want to for half the time or all the time, those days seem to be kind of gone.
I'm very blessed. I work for a company that's owned by a family. So, yeah, it's a little bit different than being
Hey,
a big conglomerate.
radio. Well, you know what? I know. So that's great. And I just, I've never really considered that at 75 years old, I'd still be going out doing Firefall gigs and having to make time to make a new record and write songs for, but it sure is fun. And, I'm blessed to still be able to do it.
So your show is going to be on Wednesday, October 29th here at the Rialto Theater here in Tucson. Uh, you mentioned a couple of the other members, including yourself, but who is in the band?
Who is in the band is myself, the only original guy. The two singers are Stephen Weinmeister, who's been in the band 25 years, who sings all the old Rick Roberts parts mostly, and John Bisaha on bass, who is also the lead singer in the Babies, who hardly ever work anymore. And he's an LA guy with one of the greatest rock and roll voices I've ever worked with live.
Wow.
He's a killer singer. And it is just so much fun making albums with those guys. It's like, woohoo! I don't even care if I sing on a song. It's like, you guys go out there and sing, And yeah, I give myself a song or two to sing on albums, but they're great. Sandy Ficca, the drummer, has been in the band 30 years, and after David Muse, our original sax flute player, got real sick, we got Jim Waddell to replace him for a couple of years as David unfortunately was going down.
Mhm.
And, David died about 3 years ago, and Jim became full time. He'd been playing with us on and off, since the 80s, probably. A great sax and flute player, and all keyboards too. But on a flute player, it's like, oh boy, playing the end of Strange Way. He gets the biggest standing ovation of the night. The Strange Way flute solo at the end, which is our next to last song. But to still be doing this is so great. And I learned a long time ago that people are buying tickets to see Firefall because they want to hear You Are the Woman and Just Remember I Love You and, Mexico and all the songs that they're really familiar with, and that we have to keep a lot of those songs like they're supposed to sound, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and there's plenty of songs for me as lead guitar players to go try to find new places to go and just jam. And and when we trade off with sax and flute, uh, and my guitar playing, a lot of spontaneous stuff goes on, but in certain sections, because
Mhm.
we've got so many songs. And we're so fortunate and blessed to have had you know 60 minutes worth of recognizable songs. We had three top 10 records and one number one, You Are the Woman, with the easy listening charts for about a month, and back in 1976. So we're really fortunate to have as many songs as we have. And I'll tell you what, when we only play a 45-minute set with two or three other bands on the bill, I know exactly which 45 minutes we're going to do, and we don't have really room for anything new. Hey, let's play one of the songs. I don't know if we have time. You know,
Are we going to hear some of the songs off Friends and Family, and maybe even the pop?
yeah, on a headline show when we get to play 90 minutes or two 1 hour sets, and I think we're playing 75 or 90 there in Tucson. Yeah, we're going to throw in a couple of things, and we're going to throw in that Doobie Brothers song with John Just Kills on, and it's just so much fun, and we that's the deal. It's fun, and these songs are, I hate to say it, but a walk down memory lane, and to
Mhm.
look at people's faces in the crowd or hear them tell their story about, we got married to Just Remember I Love You, and we've my husband always plays that song for it's like it's just really cool.
So where can people follow you? You guys obviously got a website, social media. You guys there?
Yeah, Firefall, whatever it is on social media, Firefall the band maybe, but I think it's Firefall. And our website, we have two websites, and I didn't even realize we had two. The one that I knew about was um, firefallofficial.com.
Okay.
But then I think there's firefallband.net or something like that. But, I've been so busy that, other people take care of that stuff.
Well, I'll make sure we post the correct one for the listeners.
Well, I hope, Larry, that you can play a song or two off of this, or a song or two off of this.
Oh,
My
yes.
my son did these covers. He's a graphic designer, artist, that has been a real talented guy on that kind of stuff. And I told him, I said, why don't you give us an album cover for the first one, and kind of that old Yosemite Firefall, Comet, whatever you come up with. And 24 hours later, he presented me with three covers.
Wow.
These two and what we used for the cover art. I mean, the CD disc art, and it's just like, and Firefall's always kind of been known for those covers, like our blue one with the comet, you
Oh, yeah.
know, which I helped design back in the day. And thankfully they didn't let me, the artist, paint it. I wanted to paint the cover, and they said, "No, thanks. Great idea, kid. We'll take it from here." And they did that blue comet in the lake, masterful, and it was just, better than I could have ever even thought about doing. But the concept is, I don't know if you know who the illustrator Maxfield Parrish is,
I've heard, yes.
but he's the guy with blues. And he went from about, I guess, 1890 to 1930 or something. And he had such famous, striking pictures, mostly in blue, that I was thinking, when the whole idea came to me, back in those days, of course, in a record store, there might be 150 albums on the wall, or 72 rows of 75 or something. And by God, you needed to have something to catch people's eyes. You,
Hmm.
with Firefall being, Yosemite and the Firefall, and the whole, I wanted to have people go, "What's this?" even if they'd never heard of Firefall, or maybe they'd only heard "You're the Woman," whoever band that is, it's "You Are the Woman," you know. So it sure was fun back then, Larry. I'll tell you.
Well, yeah, I used to work for a company that hung up all the posters of the record stores. So
No,
the whole idea was to get the most visible spots so people would see it and then want to buy it.
that's right. And
Yeah.
I remember, us, because we said no, we want the big poster, the one that was like 2.5 feet by 4.5 feet or something, and one of the bigger ones. And they said, well, they only have room for, you know, 18 by 24. Okay, So we had two or three kinds of our poster, but you know, that, the impact that our first Firefall album made in 1976 was pretty damn outrageous. And yes, we had guys from the Birds and the Flying Burrito Brothers and Spirit and JoJo Gunn and but it was great. And I'll tell you one story about our beginning that was amazing. On our first week of practice, so I met Rick Roberts. I played with Graham and Emmy Lou, and Rick Roberts replaced Graham Parsons in the Flying Burrito Brothers. And we played in New York City with Graham and Emmy Lou and the Fallen Angels, which I was a part of, and Rick Roberts, the solo guy from the Flying Burrito Brothers, and all this had played the night either before or after. And I met Rick in New York, and within a few minutes, it was like, "You live in Boulder? I live in Boulder. Man, we should get together." And as it turned out, we got together, and Rick heard me play with another band, um, in Boulder, and went, "This was the guy who was, trying to be a country picker," because I had to play James Burton back in the Fallen Angels, and I wasn't really a country guy, but he heard me play and rock and roll and everything. He said, "Man, when we got together, and suddenly Mark Andes from Spirit and JoJo Gunn was up in the mountains, and we got together, and it didn't feel like a Rick Roberts solo album. It felt like a band." And he said to us, "I know this guy, Larry Burnett, in Washington, D.C., who writes great songs, and he and I sing great together. Do you want to hear a song?" And Mark and I went, "Sure." And the first song we heard was Cinderella.
Oh,
And
wow.
we went, "Oh my God, get him out here." And so when we had our first week of practice didn't have a name of the band yet, didn't have any gigs yet, but and Michael Clark was driving down from Oregon or Washington State to come join the band, we had our sights set really high. And suddenly, with Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, the songwriters, we had 20 to 25 songs to work out in our first week, which is unheard of because when you start a band, you don't know what you're going to sound like, or what songs are we going to play, or hey, I got this song. We had 20 songs, bam, that first week, and a lot of them were good enough, Mexico and Saddle Love Song and Cinderella and everything, to be on our first album a year and a half later.
Wow.
That's pretty unheard of, and it's always about the songs. And I mean, it ain't just Firefall. I mean, I mentioned earlier the Eagles or Dan Fogelberg or Little River Band. It's like the reason they got so big was their songs. Oh, and they're Australian too, but the songs, it's like, wow.
Yep, it is always about the song. And to me, a good song can also be covered and can be a different style, even if it's a great song,
Right, exactly.
because it could translate.
Yeah, and that was what was fun about Friends and Family, the two albums, because we got to dive into some of our favorite songs. Like when I was first going, okay, what Fleetwood Mac song? Because we used to open not only on Fleetwood Mac, the White Album, but we opened for Fleetwood Mac on Rumors, the biggest band in the world at the time, and, for about a month or two. And it was like the best gigs I ever played, the Rumors tour, and I'm going, which Fleetwood Mac song? And I knew the one, and somebody suggested one of their big hits, and I went, nah, no, no, that's not right. That's just like, hey, let's do Barracuda by Heart. It's like, nah, no, no, not that song. But back to Fleetwood Mac, it was like Go Your Own Way. And then I kind of thought that was almost a sacrosanct or blasphemous song to cover. In my mind, I thought go your own way, but John said, yeah, go your own way. I could sing the hell out of that. And I went, I would love to play Lindsey Buckingham. And on that song, I kind of learned some of his intro licks, which were like, when, right between the first and second verse, there's that lick. It had to be that. I didn't want to play something different, and then I would go astray and just play on the solo or whatever. But all of my solos and the whole production of those two records were, honoring the 1970s and those bands and us and all the fans. It's like, what great music. There will never be a decade like the 70s.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I mean, back and then in the 80s, of course, is when record labels wanted to come to all your practices for the album, and they wanted to pick the songs with you, and they wanted to, here, do this song. And Mark Andy's got that with Heart when the label came in and said, we want you to do, and Ann and Nancy kind of resisted some of those Alone songs until the record label said, no, you're doing these. And it's like, in the 80s, it's like the artist kind of lost creative control.
Yeah, I didn't, I was a kid at a lot of that point, but I remember hearing a lot. And now when I look back at those, especially that middle 80s, a lot of the stuff all sounds alike. Doesn't matter the type of band, all the songs sound alike,
Right.
because they all had that keyboard, they all had the synth, and they all had this overproduction almost.
Right.
You know,
Which was one of the great things about the really good bands of the 70s. It was pretty cut down. And even, I mean, two of my favorite bands of the 70s are Steely Dan and Little Feat. Okay. And both of those bands, in totally different ways, just put it out there. And Little Feat with the groove, you got three guys playing a shuffle doing and you got Lowell and somebody else playing straight 4/4/4 and just going, oh man, it was, great bands, but the simplicity of that. And, and we were definitely conscious of that. And I remember, some of us in the band, kind of didn't really dig the idea of putting strings on a song, or, well, we're going to come in with the horn section and the strings tomorrow. And we're going, wait a minute, but, they were right. I mean, Strange Way needed to have strings on it. Yeah, and if you use all that other production stuff to further the song and the sound of the band, great. In the 80s, a lot of people kind of just started, they became all that other stuff.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Well, Jock, I appreciate you taking time. I'm looking forward to seeing the show. It's going to be on Wednesday, October 29th, Firefall at the Rialto Theater. Get your tickets at therialtotheater.com or the Rialto Theater box office or right here at klpx.com. I look forward to hopefully meeting you that night and looking forward.
By all means, come back and we'll be out at the merch table after the show. And anybody that has a Halloween mask on, we'll sign the damn mask. How about that?
Yeah, you're right. It's a couple days before Halloween.
Yeah, boy. Love this time of year. And, like you said, it's going to be a little bit cooler, in Tucson.
Absolutely. Going to be a cool night to see a great show. So,
Well,
Jock,
thank you very much, Larry. It's been fun.
last. Look